Hello, my name is Morgan Atchison, and this is a presentation titled The Extreme Makeover for NU 713, Organizational and Systems Leadership for the Advanced Practice Nurse. All right, table of contents. All right, in our introduction. During this presentation, we will discuss how effective communication is a vital part of our company. As you already know, our mission is to deliver superior care that improves the quality of life of every patient every day, setting the standards by which others in the healthcare industry are judged. The use of effective communication skills is an absolute must. We must all employ certain communication techniques in order to ensure that our patients receive the very best care possible. This effort is aimed to support and reiterate the use of effective communication with our clinical area. It is also done in concurrence with our core values, which put our patients first by delivering exceptional care through a collaboration of professional individuals. And finally, the goal of this presentation is to improve patient care by minimizing mistakes made by breakdowns in communication. All right, so why is effective communication a vital part of our company? First, it is essential in order to provide optimal care and promote patient satisfaction. It reduces the instances of preventable mistakes. It builds a sense of trust and compassion with our patients, and it helps to foster a good relationship between staff. So this is a preventable mistake. All right, so now let's look at a scenario. Let's put our thinking caps on. The scenario. Mr. R is voicing complaints about pain while urinating. The nurse sees a nurse practitioner walking in the hallway and briefly discusses the patient's concern with her. The nurse practitioner is running late for a meeting and continues walking and states, "Just get some urine from him and send it off," as she quickly walks out the door. After collecting the urine, the nurse is entering the lab order when he realizes that there are two options for this test: a urinalysis and a urine culture and sensitivity. The nurse is unsure which option to pick, but he doesn't want to bother the nurse practitioner while she's in her important meeting. Rather than clarifying, the nurse just chooses the urinalysis and sends the urine to the lab. After the nurse receives the results, he reports them to the nurse practitioner. She is dismayed and wants to know why a urinalysis was ordered when she clearly wanted the urine culture and sensitivity. After the nurse explains what happened, rather than being mad, the nurse practitioner just laughs and states that she should have been more specific. She replies, "These results are useless, so go get some more urine and this time order a culture and sensitivity." All right, so let's break it down. What went wrong? First, the conversation between the nurse and the nurse practitioner was rushed. Second, the nurse practitioner did not give a specific order. And third, rather than clarifying the order, the nurse ordered the wrong test. So let's do an analysis on it. What happened here? What resulted from this miscommunication? First, a delay in treatment for the patient. And secondly, an unneeded medical expense. So let's talk now about organization as conversation. There's two aspects: patterns of meaning and patterns of relating. Patterns of meaning. Patterns of meaning are specific things that exist within an organization. It can be derived from the vision or the mission of the organization. And as we already talked, Fresenius' mission revolves around delivering superior patient care to every patient every time. Thus, positive patient outcomes and patient satisfaction are its primary objectives. Now, patterns of meaning can be either around the vision or the mission, or it can be around the fiscal environment of the organization. All right? So the next one, patterns of relating. And this is basically how people interact with each other within an organization, and how people can have certain habits or preferences when they talk or have interactions, such as having an email preference or texting, phone calls, or face-to-face interaction. Or it can be related to rituals, such as somebody always sitting in a certain chair, or somebody always doing this thing rather than letting somebody else do it, and so on and so forth. All right. So let's relate these two aspects to the response of the staff to the previous scenario. All right. So the next day prior to our daily break room meeting, in which the nurse practitioner just had to sit in her special chair, patterns of relating, someone who witnessed the conversation between the nurse and the nurse practitioner sent out a group text to the rest of the staff, let them know what happened the day before. That's patterns of relating as well. After the meeting started, while the nurse practitioner was discussing a patient's plan of care, someone snickered and said, "Would you like your analysis on that patient too?" Patterns of meaning. Everyone laughed hysterically. Then jokingly, the nurse and the nurse practitioner had to both tell their elaborated sides of the story, and of course, try to get the staff to choose sides. Patterns of relating. After the comedy show ended, they all seriously discussed the importance of using effective communication and how it relates to a positive patient outcome. Patterns of meeting. All right, so ways of talking. First, we got to be conscientious. Second, we need to use rhetorical devices. An example of those can include influencing the path of conversation, constructing urgency, using metaphors, and influencing beliefs about what is true or what is real. So rather than just saying, hello, how are you, you kind of influence the conversation. Well, I seen you limping in today, Mr. R. What's wrong? All right, so ways of listening. First, communication, as we all know, is a collaborative process. We need to be observant of nonverbal cues and gestures such as facial expressions and hand movements. We always must pay attention. We need to make attempts to minimize distractions, which is not always possible. And we need to be mindful of an individual's tone of voice. Okay, so let's reflect and rewrite the scenario and see how it should have taken place. Okay, upon admission to the facility, the nurse notices some facial grimacing from Mr. R. The nurse asks, "Why the long face, Mr. R?" He replies that for the last 2 days he has had pain while urinating. The nurse replies, "I'm sorry to hear this. I'll let the nurse practitioner know." The nurse sees the nurse practitioner walking in the hallway and briefly discusses the patient's concern with her. The nurse practitioner is running late for a meeting but stops to hear what the nurse has to say. After listening to the nurse practitioner replies, "Get some urine from Mr. R and send it to the lab for a urine culture of sensitivity." The nurse collects the urine from the patient, puts in a lab order for a urine culture of sensitivity, and then sends the specimen to the lab. Later, when the nurse receives the results of the culture, he reports them to the nurse practitioner. The nurse practitioner orders Keflex 500 milligrams PO BID times 7 days. The nurse informs Mr. R of his lab results and of the new medication order. The nurse then smiles at the patient and says, "I'm glad you told me about your problem. This medicine should have you feeling better in no time." Mr. R smiles in relief and shows appreciation to the nurse for his help. Much better. So how was this approach to the scenario better? First, the nurse influenced the conversation. I seen when you walked in, you was kind of grimacing a little bit. Secondly, after the nurse finds out what's wrong with the patient and sees the nurse practitioner is not rushed out the door, but actually stops to hear the nurse. After she stops to hear the nurse, she gives a specific order, which in turn lets the nurse put in the order without wondering whether urinalysis or urine culture and sensitivity. Since the correct test was ordered, it sped up the process of getting the right medication to the patient, which in turn made the patient feel a lot better, more cared about. Now, we're going to reflect and rewrite, transition to innovation. First, we're going to maintain a patient-centered approach to delivering care. And this is going to be how we transition from how the first scenario went to how the rewrite of the scenario went. Okay, so we're going to maintain a patient-centered approach to delivering care. We're going to pay attention to the details. While talking to patients, we're going to use rhetorical devices, such as influencing the conversation, as we talked about earlier. We're going to be observant. We're going to be understanding and non-biased. All right. Continue with that. We're going to be mindful. We're going to do our very best to minimize distractions. This includes no cell phones on the floor. We're going to slow down. That's another thing. We are always too rushed when doing our job. We're going to try our best to slow down some. We're going to always maintain professional boundaries. And lastly, it is okay to smile. I know sometimes we get grumpy. I know sometimes we feel rushed. I know sometimes it feels like we have more on our plate than we can do. But we do need to slow down and take time to smile and kind of be as nice as we can to our patients, regardless of how our personal life is going. All right, and this is our last slide. And I included this quote because it's very true. It says, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place," by Gerald Bernard Shaw. And that's very true. We should never assume that communication has already taken place. But instead, we need to make sure by using effective communication techniques to ensure that it's taking place. All right, our last slide is our reference slide. Thank you for watching.